I'm Liam, 28 years old, and the words still echo in my head, a chilling mantra of betrayal. She got pregnant, but it wasn't mine. It wasn't a whispered rumor or a suspicion, but a stark, undeniable truth that hit me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air in the quiet sanctuary of our shared apartment. One moment I was picturing a future with a white picket fence, a swing set in the yard, tiny shoes by the door. The next, that entire world shattered, replaced by a grotesque image of deceit and a gaping wound in my chest. The light, the warmth, the very air in the room seemed to congeal into a heavy, suffocating weight, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. My hands, which moments before had been idly tracing the lines of a prenatal scan, now trembled uncontrollably, the crinkling paper a harsh symphony of my unraveling. I saw the dates, the doctor's name, the measurements. Undeniable proof of life growing within her, a life I had so eagerly anticipated as our own. But the timeline? It didn't fit. My mind, usually so sharp and analytical, spun in a dizzying vortex of confusion and denial, frantically trying to reconcile the impossible. No, no, this can't be right. I must be mistaken, misreading something, anything. But the numbers stared back cold and unwavering, condemning the beautiful lie I had been living. The silence in the apartment was deafening, amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart in my ears. I felt a visceral revulsion not just for the betrayal, but for the profound ignorance I had been living in. How could I have been so blind, so utterly foolish, the bitter taste of self-reproach mixed with the acrid tang of shock? It wasn't just a baby. It was a symbol, a monument to a secret life she had constructed, one I had been entirely excluded from. And the worst part, the truly horrifying part, was the dawning realization that the joy I had felt, the pure, unadulterated excitement, had been built on a foundation of sand, on a lie so profound it twisted my very perception of reality. The shock was a cold alien presence settling deep in my bones, chilling me to the core. For years, I had poured every ounce of my being into building a life for us, for the future I believed we shared. From the moment I met Sarah, fresh out of college, her vibrant energy and quick wit captivating me, I saw a partner, a future, a family. I was 22 then, full of youthful idealism and a fierce desire to prove myself. My first job out of university was a grind, long hours, and meager pay, but I embraced it with a singular focus: us. I'd save every spare penny not for myself, but for that shared dream. I remembered countless late nights hunched over my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my tired face, while Sarah slept peacefully beside me. I'd mute the keyboard clicks, careful not to disturb her, fueled by cheap coffee and the image of a future where we wouldn't have to worry, where our children would have everything I hadn't. Our tiny, cramped apartment, with its perpetually leaky faucet and thin walls that carried the sounds of our neighbors' lives, felt like a palace because she was in it. I painted it myself a soft cream color, picturing baby furniture against the walls someday. I fixed the leaky faucet, learned basic plumbing from YouTube because I wanted to create a stable home, a sanctuary. I worked 2 jobs for a time, a barista in the mornings before my main office work, the smell of roasted coffee beans clinging to my clothes, my hands always slightly sticky. It was exhausting, a blur of early mornings and late nights. But every dollar earned felt like a brick, laid in the foundation of our shared life. I remembered the worn soles of my shoes, the ache in my shoulders, the constant hum of fatigue in my bones. But I never complained. Sarah was my motivation, her laughter, her dreams, the quiet way she would squeeze my hand when I felt overwhelmed. I saw it as an investment, not just in a relationship, but in a destiny we were weaving together. I had always been the dependable one, the planner, the rock. My own upbringing had been modest, and I carried a deep-seated belief that hard work and sacrifice were the keys to a better life. So I sacrificed. Social gatherings with friends often took a backseat to extra shifts. New clothes for myself were a luxury I rarely indulged in, while Sarah's wardrobe steadily grew. Her impulsive desires, a weekend trip to the coast, a new camera, a course in pottery. I supported them all, often dipping into my own carefully hoarded savings. It's important for you to pursue your passions. I'd tell her, genuinely believing that her happiness was intertwined with mine. Her smile, her bright eyes, that was my reward. It was a silent agreement, unspoken, but deeply understood, that our individual pursuits were all ultimately for the collective good of us. I remember the careful discussions we had about our future, mapping out milestones, saving for a down payment on a house, establishing our careers, and, eventually, children. These conversations were filled with such tenderness, such shared excitement. She'd talk about nursery colors, and I'd envision teaching our son to throw a baseball or our daughter to ride a bike. Every decision I made, every extra hour I put in, was filtered through that lens. How will this benefit our family, our future? The exhaustion was a constant companion, but it was a noble exhaustion, a badge of honor for the efforts I was making. The thought of providing, of being the solid ground beneath her feet, gave my life a profound sense of purpose. I loved the feeling of being needed, of being essential to someone's happiness. It felt like the truest expression of love, a quiet, unwavering commitment built brick by brick, moment by moment, without fanfare or expectation of immediate return. It was simply what you did for the person you loved, for the life you were building. The subtle shifts began so gradually, they were almost imperceptible, like the slow creep of ivy up a wall, beautiful at first, then suffocating. It started with small things. Sarah would forget to do her share of the chores, leaving a sink full of dishes or laundry piling up. When I'd gently remind her, she'd offer a quick, almost dismissive apology, coupled with a perfectly logical yet flimsy excuse. "Oh, I had a really tough day at work," or "my head just isn't in it right now." And the understanding partner, would simply pick up the slack, reassuring her that it was fine, that I understood. I saw it as a temporary phase, a slight dip in her energy, and my role was to support her through it. Then came the financial requests. Initially, they were small. "Could you spot me for dinner? I forgot my wallet." Or, "My credit card is maxed out. Could you cover this for now?" These instances grew more frequent and the amounts increased. A new expensive purse, she just had to have, a weekend spa retreat with friends that she insisted she deserved. Each time I'd rationalize it, telling myself that she worked hard too, that she deserved these comforts, even if it meant dipping deeper into our shared savings, or more often my own personal funds. I'd show her our budget, our savings goals, try to explain the importance of being financially responsible, but her eyes would glaze over and she'd sigh dramatically. "You're so boring, Liam. Can't we just live a little?" And again, I'd relent, wanting to avoid conflict, wanting to see her happy, even if a part of me felt a quiet unease. The scales were tipping slowly but surely, and I was always the one giving, always the one accommodating. Her excuses for not spending time with me became more elaborate, less believable. "Girls' night," she'd say, even when her friends seemed to be busy. Late meetings that stretched into the early hours of the morning, yet she'd return without the usual weariness of a long workday. My internal alarms, usually so quiet, began to chime, faint at first, then growing in intensity. But I suppressed them. I loved her, and love, I believed, meant trust, meant patience, meant giving the benefit of the doubt. Any questions that arose in my mind, any niggling suspicions, I dismissed as my own insecurities, my own overthinking. I remembered one specific evening about 8 months before the bomb dropped. I had planned a surprise dinner, her favorite Italian, cooked from scratch, candles lit, music playing. I'd spent hours preparing, meticulously chopping vegetables, simmering sauce, anticipating her delight. She arrived home almost 2 hours late, her phone clutched in her hand, her eyes evasive. Something came up. She mumbled, avoiding my gaze. her voice laced with an unfamiliar tension. The elaborate meal, the romantic atmosphere, it all deflated. I tried to press gently at first, then, with a growing sense of desperation. Sarah, what's going on? You seem distant. She snapped, her voice sharp, a tone I rarely heard directed at me. Nothing's going on, Liam. Stop being so clingy. Can't I just have a life? The words stung, a cruel and undeserved rebuke for my efforts. I retreated hurt, but still clinging to the idea that it was just stress, just her needing space. I tried to understand, to be the patient, supportive boyfriend I always had been. The manipulation became more overt. She'd use my love for her, my desire for our future against me. If you really loved me, you wouldn't question me about money, or, if you trusted me, you wouldn't ask where I was all night. These were not requests for understanding but veiled threats, coercive tactics wrapped in the language of affection. I felt a growing sense of suffocation, as if the air was slowly being squeezed out of my lungs. The bright, confident woman I had fallen in love with seemed to be receding, replaced by someone demanding, entitled, and increasingly opaque. Yet the deep-seated belief in our shared future, the years I had invested, the very fabric of my identity, intertwined with hers, kept me tethered. I clung to the hope that this was just a phase, a difficult patch, and that if I just loved her enough, sacrificed enough, endured enough, she would come back to me, the woman I knew, the woman who shared my dreams. The exhaustion I felt now was different, not the noble fatigue of building, but the weary drain of constantly giving without receiving, of holding on to something that felt like it was slipping through my fingers, sand by agonizing sand. The love I felt was turning into a heavy chain, binding me to a reality that was becoming increasingly unlivable, yet I saw no escape, only the relentless, suffocating pressure of trying to keep us afloat, even as I was drowning. The moment everything fell apart wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession. It was silent, sterile, and utterly devastating. It happened on a Tuesday, a day that had started like any other, filled with the mundane rhythm of work and anticipation. Sarah had an early doctor's appointment, a routine checkup, she'd said. I'd offered to go, but she'd insisted she could manage, citing my busy work schedule. I remember feeling a slight pang of disappointment but brushed it off, happy she was taking care of herself. When I arrived home that evening, the apartment was quiet, unnervingly so. Her purse was on the kitchen counter unusually, and next to it a small white envelope. It was open, slightly crinkled, a medical office logo subtly embossed on the corner. Curiosity, an almost instinctual pull, drew me to it. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the slick paper inside. It was a prenatal scan report. My heart gave a sudden painful lurch, a mix of confusion and a terrifying nascent excitement. A baby? Our baby. She hadn't said anything. She'd been so quiet about it. My hands trembled as I pulled out the images, blurry gray and white shapes, undeniably a human form. And then the accompanying report. Estimated gestational age 16 weeks, 3 days. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. 16 weeks. My mind raced, frantically calculating. 16 weeks ago, Sarah had been on a girls' trip to Miami, a trip I had encouraged, even paid for, because she deserved a break. A trip that in my meticulously planned life had fallen precisely during the week I was away on a business trip, a conference in San Francisco. A trip that I now realized with sickening clarity directly coincided with the period of conception. The air in the room seemed to freeze thin and sharp. The joyful anticipation of moments before evaporated, replaced by a cold, searing dread. It wasn't just that she was pregnant. It was that the timing made it mathematically impossible for the child to be mine. My blood ran cold, a glacial current seeping through my veins, chilling me to the core. Every memory, every shared laugh, every tender moment twisted and distorted, seen through the dark lens of this new horrific truth. The entire edifice of our relationship, the future I had so meticulously constructed, imploded in that instant, leaving behind only dust and jagged edges. I stared at the scan, the tiny, innocent life, a grotesque testament to her deception. A baby. Someone else's baby. Growing inside the woman I loved, the woman I had sacrificed everything for. The image swam before my eyes, blurring into an unbearable kaleidoscope of betrayal. I felt a profound disorientation, as if the floor beneath me had dropped away, leaving me suspended in a void. My vision narrowed the edges of the room, darkening the sounds of the city outside, fading into an indistinct hum. All that remained was the deafening roar of my own blood in my ears and the frantic animalistic pulse of a heart breaking into a million irreparable pieces. How? The question clawed at my throat, a silent scream that tore through my very being. How could she? How could she do this to me, to us? The years of unquestioning loyalty, the countless sacrifices, the unwavering trust, all of it had been a foolish illusion, a stage for her elaborate deceit. The memories of her evasiveness, her late nights, her casual dismissal of my concerns, coalesced into a chilling mosaic of calculated lies. She hadn't just cheated, she had built an entire alternative reality concealed beneath layers of affection and feigned commitment. The sheer audacity of it, the cold, clinical precision of her betrayal was breathtaking. A wave of nausea washed over me, a bitter bile rising in my throat. It wasn't just the baby, it was the entire unspoken narrative of our life together. Had she ever truly loved me, or was I just a convenient prop, a source of stability, a fool to be manipulated? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a horrifying realization that the intimacy we shared, the vulnerable moments, had been nothing but a performance on her part. My mind, usually so logical, so rational, spun in chaotic disarray. I felt detached from my own body, an observer watching my life shatter into irreparable fragments. The pain was so intense, so all-consuming that it transcended tears. It was a raw, primal agony, leaving me hollowed out, utterly gutted. The silence in the apartment pressed in heavier now, suffocating me with the weight of her deceit. I was alone, utterly and completely alone in the ruins of a life I had so carefully built, a life that was never truly mine. I don't know how long I stood there, rooted to the spot, the scan report still clutched in my trembling hand. Minutes, hours, time ceased to exist in that void of shock and disbelief. The sun began to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the room, mimicking the darkness that had descended upon my soul. When I finally moved, it was not with a burst of rage, but with a slow, deliberate numbness. My body felt heavy, alien, as if I were moving through thick water. I picked up my phone, my fingers fumbling with the keys, and typed a single simple message to Sarah. We need to talk. Now. No accusations, no questions, just a stark, undeniable imperative. I set the phone down, then walked to the bedroom, stripped the sheets from our bed and threw them into a hamper. The pillows, too. Anything that held the scent of her, the memory of our shared intimacy, felt contaminated, diseased. I moved with a chilling efficiency, the numbness a fragile shield against the emotional carnage within. I waited in the living room, a silent sentinel, the prenatal scan report lying on the coffee table between us, a damning witness. The apartment was still the only sound, the frantic thrum of my own pulse. When Sarah finally arrived, the key turning in the lock, a jarring sound in the silence, she walked in with her usual bright ease, a casual, "Hey Liam, long day," on her lips. Then she saw me sitting stiffly on the couch, and her eyes landed on the report. Her face, usually so expressive, instantly drained of color, turning ashen. The bright, easy smile vanished, replaced by a mask of terror. The casual purse she had tossed onto the floor slipped from her grasp, spilling its contents in a chaotic sprawl. The air thickened with unspoken dread. "What's this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, a thin thread of denial in the face of undeniable proof. "You tell me." I replied, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the earthquake raging within me. My gaze never left her face, watching for any flicker of remorse, any sign of truth, but found only fear. She stumbled forward, picking up the scan, her eyes darting frantically from the image to my face, then back to the gestational age on the report. Her lips trembled. Liam, I can explain. Explain what, Sarah? I cut her off, my voice still eerily calm, but with an underlying current of icy fury. Explain the 16 weeks. Explain the Miami trip. Explain how you could lie to me, to us for months. How you could let me talk about our future, our baby, when you knew damn well it wasn't ours. Tears welled in her eyes, but they felt false, a performance. I was scared, she choked out. I didn't know how to tell you. Scared. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Scared you were scared? What about me? Sarah, what about the man who gave you everything, who planned his entire life around you, who worked himself to exhaustion to build a future for us? What about my fear, my devastation, my complete and utter disorientation now? My voice finally cracked the control I had so painstakingly maintained, fracturing. The pain was a physical entity, a jagged shard tearing through my chest. She sank onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands. It was a mistake, Liam, a horrible, terrible mistake. A mistake. I echoed, my voice rising now, the icy calm replaced by a raw, guttural ache. 16 weeks isn't a mistake, Sarah. It's a choice. A deliberate, calculated act of betrayal. You didn't just sleep with someone else. You created an entire secret life, a secret future, and let me live in a fantasy. You poisoned everything. The words were like acid on my tongue, burning with a truth I had desperately tried to avoid. I didn't mean to hurt you, she sobbed, looking up at me, her face a tear-streaked mess. Didn't mean to hurt me. My laughter was harsh, devoid of mirth. Then what did you mean to do? Keep it a secret forever? Let me raise another man's child thinking it was mine. What kind of monster does that, Sarah? My voice was trembling now, a barely suppressed roar. What kind of monster plays God with someone's life, someone's dreams, someone's love like that? She flinched at the word monster, recoiling as if I had struck her. It was just a moment of weakness. I was lonely. You were always working. The excuse was a fresh wound, a cruel twist of the knife. Lonely, I was working for us, Sarah. For the life we planned, every late night, every extra shift, every penny I saved was for you, for us, for this future. And you were lonely. You were lonely, so you sought comfort in another man's bed, and then you allowed a life to grow from that loneliness and let me believe it was ours. You are truly despicable. The words felt inadequate, hollow against the magnitude of her deceit. I was going to tell you, she insisted, pushing herself up onto her knees, reaching for my hand. I recoiled, pulling my hand back, as if her touch burned. I just needed time to figure things out. Time. I stood towering over her, my voice low and menacing now. Time for what, Sarah? To string me along until the truth became unavoidable, to bind me to a child that isn't mine, to a future that is a complete fabrication. There is no figuring things out here. You made your choice. You betrayed me. You betrayed us. You betrayed everything we built. My voice was a raw, primal scream, finally unleashed, shattering the fragile veneer of composure. Get out. Get out of my apartment. Get out of my life. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic plea. Liam, please don't do this. I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem anymore, Sarah. I said, my voice cold, a chilling echo of the man I used to be. You made your bed. Now lie in it. You chose this. You chose him. You chose a life that didn't include me, a life built on lies. So now you get to live with it. Alone. My parents were a blur of well-meaning but ultimately ineffective comfort in the days that followed. My mother, with her soft words and worried eyes, wanted me to talk, to cry, to process. My father, gruff and practical, suggested I get a lawyer, start the legal separation paperwork. They were good, kind people, but they couldn't understand the depth of the chasm that had opened inside me. How could they? They had lived a life of unwavering stability, their love a quiet, steady flame. They had never known this kind of betrayal, this soul-crushing disorientation. Friends tried too. "Let's get a beer, man. Come over, we'll watch the game." I accepted their invitation, sat through the forced camaraderie, smiled at the appropriate moments but felt utterly detached. Their world, with its trivial concerns and easy laughter, felt miles away from my shattered reality. Their pity, however well-intentioned, felt like a heavy cloak suffocating me. I nodded, mumbled vague answers, and retreated into myself the moment I could, seeking the hollow comfort of my now empty apartment. The first week was a blur of raw, unadulterated pain. I didn't eat, barely slept. The days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light outside the window. The silence in the apartment, once so unnerving, became a suffocating shroud. Every object, every space was imbued with her presence, a painful reminder of the life we had shared, a life now revealed as a meticulously constructed lie. Her scent still lingered on the pillows, on a forgotten scarf, a phantom presence that tormented me. I scrubbed, I cleaned, I opened windows wide, desperate to purge her from my space. But the memories clung, tenacious and insidious. I would sit for hours staring at nothing, my mind a chaotic vortex of questions and replays. Had I missed the signs? Was I somehow to blame? The self-blame was as corrosive as the pain, gnawing at my sense of worth, eroding my self-trust. I felt foolish, weak, a pathetic caricature of the strong, dependable man I had always prided myself on being. One morning, nearly 2 weeks after the explosion, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, hollowed out, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. My face was gaunt, my hair unkempt. I looked like a ghost, a shell of the man I once was. And in that moment, a flicker of something, a tiny spark ignited within the desolate wasteland of my grief. "This isn't you, Liam." The thought was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the noise of my despair. This wasn't the man who had worked tirelessly, who had planned and saved, who had believed in a better future. This was a victim, a shadow, and I refused to be that anymore. It wasn't a grand epiphany, no sudden surge of empowerment. It was a slow, painful crawl back from the abyss. The next day, I forced myself to eat a proper meal, even though every bite felt like ash in my mouth. I went for a run, pushing my aching body, sweat stinging my eyes, until the physical exertion became a temporary distraction from the emotional torment. I cleaned the apartment again, this time, with a grim determination not to erase her, but to reclaim my space, to make it mine again. I packed all of her remaining belongings into boxes, taped them shut, and stacked them neatly by the door. No rage, no tears, just a quiet, deliberate act of severance. I knew this wasn't the end of the pain, not by a long shot. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too profound. But as I sat on my couch that evening, the silent boxes, a monument to a life now closed, I felt a faint stir of something akin to hope. A fragile, tentative promise that I could and would rebuild. The awakening came not from a dramatic moment, nor from a profound, self-realized insight. It came from a simple, unexpected email from an old university professor, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Dr. Reed taught urban planning and public policy, a field I'd considered briefly before settling into finance, seduced by the promise of stability. Her email was a mass one sent to former students advertising a new mentorship program for young professionals interested in civic development. It was generic, easily overlooked, but for some reason its subject line, "Building Communities," caught my eye. I had been adrift in a sea of self-pity and pain, my days a monotonous cycle of work-forced exercise and the suffocating silence of my apartment. I hadn't genuinely connected with anyone in weeks. My friends' well meaning attempts at distraction felt hollow, my parents' quiet concern a constant reminder of my failure. I was a ghost haunting my own life. Dr. Reed's email, however, was different. It spoke of tangible things: urban renewal, sustainable design, community gardens, affordable housing. It was about building, not breaking, not deceiving, just building. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a tiny spark of interest, faint but undeniable, flickered within me. It wasn't about love or loss or betrayal. It was about purpose, about creation. I replied to her email, a brief, somewhat stilted message expressing vague interest. I didn't expect a response, certainly not a personal one. But the next morning, my inbox chimed with a reply, a short, direct message from Dr. Reed herself. Liam, I remember you. You always had a thoughtful perspective on complex problems. Come to my office next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Let's talk about how you can put that to use. Her words were simple yet powerful. They bypassed the emotional wreckage, the personal humiliation, and spoke directly to something deeper within me: my intelligence, my capacity, my potential. It wasn't sympathy, which I'd grown to resent, but recognition. She saw past the broken man and glimpsed the person I had been, the person I could still be. She offered no platitudes, no empty assurances, just a direct invitation to engage, to contribute, to build. That Tuesday morning, as I walked into Dr. Reed's office, the familiar scent of old books and strong coffee filled the air. She greeted me with a warm, no-nonsense smile. We talked for an hour, not about Sarah, not about my pain, but about city planning, about blight, about the challenges of fostering truly inclusive communities. She spoke of the tangible impact of well-designed policy, of how a single project could transform a neighborhood, improve lives. I found myself listening, truly, listening for the first time in weeks. My mind, usually consumed by the circular torment of my grief, found itself grappling with concrete problems, with solutions, with possibilities beyond my own shattered world. You know, Liam, she said, leaning back in her chair, her gaze steady and perceptive. The best way to heal is to build, to take what's broken and make something new. Not necessarily to fix the old, but to create something entirely different, something stronger. Her words weren't revolutionary, no grand philosophical pronouncements. But in that moment, delivered by a woman who saw me as capable, as someone with value, they resonated with a profound truth. They shifted something deep within me, a subtle reorientation of my internal compass. I had been so focused on the demolition, on the gaping hole left by Sarah's betrayal, that I hadn't even considered the possibility of new construction. What do you want to build, Liam? She asked, her eyes twinkling. The question hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation. I didn't have an immediate answer, but for the first time in a long time, the question didn't fill me with despair. Instead, it sparked a fragile, nascent curiosity. What did I want to build? The possibility, however faint, was there, and that I realized was the beginning of reclaiming my control, of finding a new purpose, of rebuilding myself, not into who I was before, but into someone stronger, someone shaped by the scars but not defined by them. The process of fighting back, of reclaiming control, wasn't a sudden explosion of triumph, but a slow, arduous climb out of the abyss. It began with the apartment, the physical space that felt so contaminated by Sarah's deception. I had already packed her things, but now I decided to break the lease. It was a shared apartment, yes, but every corner, every shadow held a memory that choked me. I needed a clean slate. The act of signing the termination papers, of giving notice, felt like severing a cord, a final definitive cut. It was painful, a wrenching goodbye to a future that would never be, but it was also liberating. I found a small, single-bedroom apartment in a different neighborhood, one where every wall, every floorboard was a blank canvas untainted by her presence. The move itself was a catharsis, each box unpacked, each piece of furniture placed a deliberate act of building something new, something mine. Then came the legal side of things. It wasn't about revenge, not truly, though the temptation for it lingered like a phantom ache. It was about protecting myself, about ensuring she couldn't further exploit my trust or resources. My lawyer, a stern but compassionate woman, guided me through the separation of finances, the formal dissolution of our shared assets. It was a messy, uncomfortable process, dredging up old joint accounts, shared bills, the intricate financial tapestry we had woven together. Each line item was a reminder of my investment, her exploitation. But with each document signed, each transfer completed, I felt a layer of the suffocating weight lift. It wasn't about winning. It was about disentangling, about setting myself free from the financial bonds that still tied me to her. Professionally, I found a new, almost frantic energy. Dr. Reed's mentorship had opened doors, introducing me to a network of individuals passionate about civic development. I started volunteering on small urban planning projects, contributing my analytical skills, my knack for problem solving. The work was demanding, often thankless, but it felt real tangible. It was about creating, about improving, about making a positive impact, however small, on the world around me. This was a stark contrast to the emotional void left by my personal life, a productive outlet for the restless energy that had once been consumed by anger and despair. I took on a pro bono project for a local nonprofit, helping them secure funding for a community garden initiative. The satisfaction of seeing a neglected patch of urban wasteland transform into a vibrant green space tended by neighborhood volunteers was a balm to my wounded soul. I started restructuring my life with a fierce intentionality. My schedule, once dictated by Sarah's whims and my desperate attempts to earn enough for us, became my own. I set boundaries politely but firmly. Friends who still tried to bring up Sarah or the scandal were met with a polite but unwavering change of subject. I wasn't ready to discuss it. Perhaps I never would be, and I didn't owe anyone the details of my pain. My old habits of people-pleasing, of putting others' needs before my own, were slowly chipped away, replaced by a quiet assertion of self-worth. It was uncomfortable at first, learning to say no, learning to prioritize my own well-being, but with each small act of self-care, I felt a subtle strengthening. I started seeing a therapist, a recommendation from Dr. Reed. It was a challenging process, delving into the layers of my grief, my anger, my feelings of foolishness and betrayal. I talked about the years of sacrifice, the emotional manipulation, the subtle ways I had allowed myself to be used. The therapist didn't offer easy answers, but she offered a safe space for me to unravel, to express the raw emotions I had kept locked away. She helped me understand that my love and trust were not weaknesses, but strengths that had been exploited. That the betrayal was hers, not mine, and that my worth was not diminished by her actions. It was a slow, agonizing process of dismantling the self-blame, of separating her actions from my identity. The gym became a new sanctuary, a place where I could channel the residual anger and frustration into physical exertion. The ache in my muscles, the sweat stinging my eyes were a welcome distraction from the emotional pain. I pushed myself not out of self-punishment, but out of a desire to build, to strengthen, to prove to myself that I was resilient. As my body grew stronger, so too did my resolve. I stopped waiting for an apology, for an explanation, for any sign of remorse from Sarah. The silence from her was in its own way a final confirmation of her indifference. It stung, yes, but it also freed me. I realized that my healing wasn't dependent on her acknowledgement or regret. It was dependent on me, on my willingness to confront the pain, to rebuild, to redefine my life on my own terms. One evening, as I stood in my new, sparsely furnished apartment, a single lamp casting a warm glow, I looked out the window at the city lights. There was no white picket fence, no tiny shoes, no swing set in the yard. but there was a quiet, profound sense of peace. I was alone, yes, but I was also free. Free from the chains of expectation, from the burden of her deceit, from the relentless cycle of giving and receiving nothing in return. I was Liam, unburdened, unmanipulated, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly, authentically myself. The fight was far from over, but I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and I was building something new, brick by careful brick, a life rooted in integrity and self-respect. The direct confrontation wasn't a planned event, not like the initial discovery. It ambushed me, catching me off guard, yet I met it with a quiet resolve born of months of rebuilding. I was at the city's annual Urban Development Gala, a sleek affair filled with industry leaders and political figures. Dr. Reed was by my side, beaming with pride as I discussed a new affordable housing initiative I had helped champion. My work in civic development had gained significant traction. I was no longer just the guy from finance, but someone making a tangible difference. My confidence, once shattered, had returned, not with arrogance, but with a grounded sense of purpose. I was mid-sentence explaining the nuances of zoning laws when I felt a hand on my arm. My blood ran cold, a familiar unease settling in my stomach. I turned, and there she was. Sarah. She was thinner than I remembered, her eyes holding a haunted, wary look. Her stomach was no longer swollen. The baby I knew had arrived months ago. I hadn't seen her since the night I told her to leave, hadn't heard a word. Liam! Her voice was a shaky whisper laced with a mix of surprise and apprehension. My heart hammered against my ribs, a primal echo of the pain she had inflicted. But I forced myself to breathe, to remain calm. This was not the time or place for a scene, and more importantly, I was no longer the desperate, heartbroken man she had left behind. Sarah. I acknowledged my voice, even polite, utterly devoid of emotion. It was a tone I had practiced in my head for months, a shield against the torrent of pain and anger that threatened to resurface. I saw you from across the room. She stammered, her gaze flickering around, perhaps searching for an escape, perhaps for sympathy. You look good. I am. I replied, the truth of it resonating deep within me. I was good. Not healed, not yet entirely whole, but irrevocably moving forward. An awkward silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken history. Dr. Reed, sensing the tension, discreetly excused herself, leaving us alone in the polite hum of the gala. I wanted to apologize. Sarah finally blurted out, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. I know I hurt you. The words so long anticipated felt hollow. Too little, too late. You didn't just hurt me, Sarah. I said, my voice still quiet but with an unwavering firmness. You dismantled my life. You twisted my perception of reality. You betrayed every ounce of trust, every sacrifice, every dream I had for us. You didn't just break my heart. You shattered my faith in human connection. That's not just hurting someone. She flinched, her eyes widening. I know. I was selfish. I was lost. Lost. I shook my head, a bitter smile touching my lips. No, Sarah. You weren't lost. You were calculating. You meticulously built a deception around me, leveraging my love and my trust for your own convenience. You watched me work myself to the bone, planning for our future, while you were building a completely different one behind my back. That wasn't lost. That was a deliberate choice. Her face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes again. I'm so sorry, Liam. I truly am. Are you sorry for what you did? Or are you sorry you got caught? I asked, my voice still low, but with a chilling precision. Are you sorry for the consequences you're facing or for the pain you inflicted? Because to me, they look remarkably similar. I paused, letting the silence hang, letting the weight of my words settle. You allowed me to be excited about a child that wasn't mine. You stood by and let me dream of being a father to your child with another man. Do you understand the depravity of that, the psychological torment you inflicted? It wasn't just physical infidelity, Sarah. It was a complete obliteration of my reality. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. The usual tears were streaming down her face now, but this time they seemed less a performance, more a genuine, albeit belated reaction to the enormity of her actions, finally reflected back at her, without filters or excuses. I I never thought about it like that. She stammered, her voice choked. Of course you didn't. I said, a dry, almost clinical edge to my tone. Because you were too busy thinking only about yourself, your loneliness, your mistakes, your inability to tell me. Never once did you consider the human being at the receiving end of your deceit. Never once did you consider the years of my life, the sacrifices, the unwavering devotion you exploited so casually. I took a deep breath, the subtle scent of her perfume a painful reminder of a past I was determined to leave behind. I've rebuilt my life, Sarah. I continued, my voice gaining strength not from anger, but from a profound sense of self-respect. It wasn't easy. It was agonizing. But I did it. I learned that my worth isn't tied to your approval or to your twisted narrative. I learned that I am capable of building something meaningful, something real, something that aligns with my values, not with someone else's deception. Her gaze dropped, her shoulders slumped, the vibrant energy I remembered from our early days completely gone. She looked small, defeated, stripped of her usual charm and evasiveness. There was no anger in her eyes now, only a raw, unadorned shame. I wanted to ask for your forgiveness. She whispered, her voice barely audible. Forgiveness isn't something you demand, Sarah, I replied, a weariness seeping into my voice. It's something earned through genuine remorse and consistent action. And quite frankly, I'm not sure you're capable of either. I looked at her, truly, looked at her, and realized there was nothing left. No residual love, no lingering anger, just a vast empty space where she used to be. I wish you well, Sarah, and I hope for the sake of your child that you learn the meaning of honesty and integrity. Because the path you chose led to destruction, and I refuse to be collateral damage in your life anymore. I turned, leaving her standing there speechless, the buzz of the gala a distant hum. There was no roar of triumph, no satisfying explosion of rage, just a quiet, profound sense of finality. I had spoken my truth, laid bare the extent of her betrayal, and in doing so, I had reclaimed a piece of myself. The air felt clearer, lighter, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. The confrontation wasn't about making her feel small, it was about making myself whole. And as I walked away, I felt an exhilarating freedom, the promise of a future unburdened by her shadow, a future I would build on a foundation of unshakable truth. The small apartment, the one I had chosen for its bare, untainted walls, became my sanctuary. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, imbued with the quiet peace of self-possession. The first thing I did after the confrontation, after the residual tremor of that encounter had settled, was to buy a large, vibrant, abstract painting for the living room. It was a chaotic swirl of blues and greens with unexpected bursts of yellow and red, a reflection perhaps of the storm I had weathered, and the new, hopeful chaos of rebuilding. Hanging it on the wall felt like an act of defiance, a visual declaration that this space, this life, was for creation, not destruction. My mornings became a ritual of calm. I'd wake before dawn, make myself a strong cup of coffee, and sit by the window watching the city awaken. I'd read not the news or work-related documents, but books. Fiction, philosophy, anything that expanded my mind beyond the confines of my recent trauma. The quiet contemplation, the deliberate act of feeding my intellect, was a balm to my soul, a stark contrast to the frantic external focus of my previous life. The simple act of brewing coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, was a moment of pure, unadulterated pleasure, a sensory anchor in my newfound peace. I started cooking again, not elaborate meals for two, but simple, nourishing dishes for myself. The rhythmic chop of vegetables, the sizzle of oil in a pan, the creative process of combining ingredients, it all felt grounding. I savored each meal, tasting the flavors, appreciating the sustenance, a quiet communion with myself. Food, once a shared experience, became an act of self-care, a way to nurture the body that had endured so much stress. The small kitchen with its gleaming countertops and neatly organized spices felt like a haven. My work in civic development flourished. The affordable housing initiative I'd worked on passed, securing significant funding and paving the way for hundreds of new homes. I remember walking through the construction site, the skeletal frames of buildings rising against the sky, and feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. This was real. This was tangible. This was a legacy built on integrity, not deceit. Dr. Reed often praised my dedication, my unique perspective, noting how my passion seemed to have deepened. She didn't know the full story of my personal journey, but she recognized the unwavering commitment, the quiet fire that fueled my efforts. Weekends were for exploration. I rediscovered my love for hiking, venturing into the state parks. The crisp air and rustling leaves, a symphony of natural beauty. The physical challenge of climbing a steep trail, the panoramic views from a summit provided a powerful sense of accomplishment, a metaphor for my own ascent from the depths of despair. I visited art galleries, sat in quiet cafes, and explored hidden corners of the city I now called home. Each new discovery was a testament to the richness of life beyond my past pain, a gentle reminder that beauty and wonder still existed, waiting to be found. The painful memories, the raw wounds of betrayal, didn't vanish overnight. They would surface occasionally like shadows flickering at the edge of my vision. A familiar song on the radio, a fleeting glimpse of a couple holding hands, a childhood memory triggered by a scent. But now, when they arose, they no longer consumed me. I had learned to acknowledge them, to feel the pang of sadness or anger, and then to gently guide my mind back to the present, to the tangible reality of my new life. The therapy had helped, giving me tools to process the grief without letting it define me. I understood now that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about integrating the pain into a stronger, more resilient self. I reconnected with old friends, but on my terms. Our conversations were lighter, less burdened by the weight of my past. I spoke of my work, my new passions, my newfound sense of peace. I guarded my heart, yes, the experience of betrayal leaving an indelible mark, but I also remained open to genuine connection. The vulnerability was still there, but it was a more discerning vulnerability, offered only to those who had earned my trust through consistent kindness and respect. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, I thought about Sarah. There was no anger now, no bitterness, just a quiet, almost detached sadness for the person she had become, for the choices she had made. The space she once occupied in my heart was no longer a gaping wound, but a healed scar, a testament to what I had endured and overcome. The baby, too. I wondered about them, hoped for their well-being, but the intense possessive ache had vanished, replaced by a distant, almost abstract sense of concern. The journey wasn't complete, and I knew there would be new challenges, new uncertainties. But I faced them with a quiet confidence, a renewed faith in life, in my own strength, in the inherent goodness that still existed in the world. I was no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I had built, brick by careful brick, in the aftermath of destruction. The small apartment, the vibrant painting, the morning coffee, the rewarding work, the quiet moments of reflection. These were the cornerstones of my new life, a life reclaimed, redefined, and ultimately profoundly peaceful.